Raiding. One of MMO content that people enjoy doing and the content that I love. Hi, my name is Vanessator. I was introduced to high-end raiding from my time playing Lost Ark when it launched the famous Fulton raid. I fell in love with the piece of content, but due to the daily grind that Lost Ark required, I decided to try out raids from other games. And the game of my choice is Final Fantasy. And I would like to share the difference of experience between both games for your knowledge or entertainment. I will try explaining how both raid differs from PF experience to gearing experience. So let's jump into it. First, let's talk how the raid system works. Each expansion will have 3 raid tier, and each raid tier in Final Fantasy have 4 fights. You can think of raid tier as Legion raids, and then the turn or the fight are the gates. When you clear a fight, you can move on to the next one and you don't need to redo the first fight or the first gate. However, there are no lockouts in Final Fantasy, so if you want more practice on the previous gate, you can still join another group for it without being able to get the reward. Another downside is when you clear with another party, the reward for that party is reduced depending on how many people have already cleared for the week. That's why sometimes you will see a PF with duty incomplete in the settings. Personally, I think that is such a good system since it allows you to help your friend who might not have enough time to raid or clear it, but you can still raid whenever you want without saving a lockout for him. Another thing that is noteworthy is the taxi system. Now, taxi is different than bus party. Basically, let's say you already cleared the first 3 gates and you don't care about the loot. You can skip all the way to the last fight by having someone who have already cleared the first 3 fights for the week to basically force the party to enter the last fight. Caution though, this method means that you let go of your opportunity to get the loot from the fight that you skip, meaning that you won't be able to get the reward until the reset happens. Let's say you're in Brel. You're already in gate 4 and you have a friend that is still in gate 1. Instead of waiting for your friend to clear gate 1 to 3, you can taxi your friend straight to gate 4, skipping all the reward from gate 1 to 3 for the week. It is quite interesting and I hope Lost Ark can implement something similar. Another thing that is really interesting is that when you start a fight, you have a limited amount of time before the game deems that you have failed and kick you out. This timer ranges from 60 to 120 minutes. Personally, I see this as a good and a bad thing. The good thing is that the game prevents you to go overtime and letting players to rest after a long raid session. There are multiple instances, especially in Inferno, where it's already past my bedtime. But since there are no time limit, we always call last pull and we end up running until 5 to 6 AM. Having a time limit gives me a schedule of, okay, I'm only going to run this raid for 2 hours. So worst case, I still can make it to my bedtime. Or, hey, my bedtime is in an hour, so I don't think I can join another session. The downside though, if you're very close to clearing and the timer is below the fight duration, you will have to leave and usually people will leave the party and call it a night. And when it happens, you have to wait for a replacement or for another day. Now, let's talk about the PF experience. I'm happy to say that there are less gatekeeping in Final Fantasy. And I think I can explain this with 2 factors. One, you can't really check other people's gear unless they are right next to you or inside the instance. So you can't really tell if he is worthy to join or not. And second, it's pretty easy to gear up in Final Fantasy and you can just join to any PF straight away with the application if you have the required eye level. Now, notice that I say less gatekeeping, not none. Gatekeeping still exists even in Final Fantasy.
But Fana, you said you can't check the gear. How can you gatekeep people?
Yes. There are 2 official ways of gatekeeping people and 1 unofficial way. The 2 ways are the min eye level and the completion status. When the party leader said this, you cannot join unless you have the required eye level or if you have already cleared the fight at least once. With that said though, usually the completion status is used when the party is trying to seriously clear or it is a re-clear, so you don't have to worry about that. The unofficial way of gatekeeping is by asking for logs. It is not a surprise, but DPS meter is pretty big here. People upload their performance to a website and people will dick measure each other. This is an extreme case though. I personally haven't experienced this type of gatekeeping from 8 months of playing this game, but I've heard that it does happen and I would personally avoid that kind of group. Other than gatekeeping, something that I want to point out is the jails. We all know too well about the support jail. Well, I'm very happy that Final Fantasy allowed the player to change job at will without requiring an alt. It is a genius solution of only needing to swap the weapon that we equip, no cash required. This allows player to swap to a support when party is missing one to reduce the amount of jail time. With that said though, the weird thing is, I still experience PF jail in this game. PF can sometimes take hours to fill, and the annoying thing about this game is your PF post will only be up for 1 hour, and you need to refresh it every time. I'm not sure why the dev thing having a PF expire is a good thing. The one reason that I can think of on why PF still feel really slow is even if you change job to a healer, you will need to relearn the whole fight, which means the proc doesn't match. It is quite an interesting experience. The next aspect that I want to talk about is the raiding experience itself. Raiding in Final Fantasy feel a lot different. One, the fight is heavily scripted. There are slight variation of the mechanic, but overall, you can put the fight on a sheet of paper and predict what will come next. Unlike Lost Ark where the boss pattern keeps changing every fight, making you react to any scenario the boss throw at you. With that said though, One thing that surprised me when I joined my first P9S is that a lot of the attack doesn't have indicator. Unlike in hard mode in Lost Ark where you can clearly see where to stand to be safe, in Savages, it requires trial and error to find it. This is very similar to Inferno where all the indicators removed, requiring the player to memorize the safe spot to avoid getting hit. This makes the fight in my opinion harder to blind prop, but easier to re-clear, since once you figure it out, you only have to do the same thing over and over again. 2. Sometimes you are meant to take damage. This is something that I have a hard time wrapping my head around first time I try raiding in Final Fantasy. Unlike Lost Ark where you try to dodge as much attack as possible and maybe only take hit if you know you can crit DPS, in Final Fantasy, you sometimes need to stack with other people intentionally to take the damage together to reduce the amount of damage a single person will take. Sometimes you also require to soak damage to avoid getting hit by an even bigger damage. 3. DPS Check. I feel like the DPS check in Final Fantasy is harder due to how the gearing system works. Enrage in Final Fantasy means complete wipe. Unlike in Lost Ark where if you play better you can still clear even after the boss enrage. The highest eye level that you can achieve in current content is 20 eye level above the min eye level. That makes it so that even though you're technically above the required eye level, it's not by a lot, meaning that you can still miss the DPS check if you have too many deaths. Speaking of that, 4. You can get rest in Final Fantasy. Unlike in Lost Ark when if you're dead, you're out of the game until you group wipe or clear. In Final Fantasy, certain classes can bring you back to life, meaning that you can AFK after you're dead. The punishment though, if you're getting rest, then you lose 20% of your base stats, which means HP and damage. That means it will be harder for you to meet the DPS check. Next, let's talk about the loot system. Unlike Lost Ark, the way bit system works is completely RNG. When the pop-up appear, player will be given 3 choices: Need, Greed, or Pass. The way it works is that you can only choose Need if the item drop is the item for the class that you're currently on, and Need will have higher priority in the loot distribution. Greed can be chosen by anyone at any time. If there are no Need roll, then the game check for Greed roll and whoever have the highest roll will get the item. If the player chooses Pass, then the roll will be automatically set to 0. Really important! Do not leave even after you roll. You need to wait until everyone have done the roll for the game to distribute the loot. If you leave before that, then the game will change your roll to pass, causing you to lose the item. I can see both positive and negative side of this. The positive is that everyone have an equal chance on winning the loot. But the negative, if you're unlucky, it can take months for you to get it. Unlike in Lost Ark where you can beat more gold if you really want the loot, which means the more time you spend grinding golds, the more power you have on the loot distribution. Another way the loot is done is by a system called Loot Master, where the party leader becomes a loot master and is in charge in loot distribution. This is usually done in a static environment, but I do see it sometimes being used in the puck in return of gil or gold as well. Lastly, let's talk about gearing. There are no honing in Final Fantasy. Instead, in order to raise your eye level, you get a higher level gear piece from multiple places: raiding, alliance gear, craft gear, or tombstone gear. Any of this gear will have good enough eye level for you to start raiding in the current tier. Not every gear is equal though. Certain gear have less than ideal substats such as tenacity. People use the balance website or Discord to check which gear is the best for their class. As you know, when I mentioned how RNG the loot system is, even though you lose the roll, you still get a book from clearing the fight. And you can trade those books for gear of your choices. Think of it as PD system. After you get the gear, you can also melt materia for boosting your substats. There are 2 slots for raid gear, and for craft gear, you can do what people call a pentamelt, where you melt 5 materia into 1 gear. Once you get the gear, all you need to do is to replace the old gear with the new one. I've achieved the beast in Final Fantasy, and it doesn't take that long. And that's the overview about how the gearing system works in Final Fantasy. And yeah, those are interesting differences that I experienced raiding in Final Fantasy. If you enjoyed this, give us a thumbs up, post in the comments something that I missed or something that you'd agree or disagree. My name is Fanasador, thanks for watching and have fun.